Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Stop Asian Hate panel event, focusing on the experience of being East and Southeast Asian in the UK specifically. This event is organized by the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre at Imperial. I'm Betty Yu, head of the Imperial Centre for Continuing Professional Development and chair of this event. This event will be moderated and recorded, and the recording will be available online afterwards. I don't know how many of you have actually heard of the Stop Asian Hate movement. This movement emerged in the wake of increase in hate crimes against East and Southeast Asian during the COVID-19 pandemic, which gained a lot of international recognition after Asian women were being murdered in March this year during the mass shooting in Atlanta, USA. The UK, unfortunately, has seen a similar rise in hate crimes and racially motivated attacks against East and Southeast Asian people, with a threefold increase in reported incidents to the police since the start of the pandemic. So in this panel event, we will focus on available facts and figures of racism and discrimination against the East and Southeast Asian community in the UK, and the way in which this community of people are portrayed in the media. And I'm very pleased to have four distinguished panel members with us today who will speak about the lived experiences and support available in the community and beyond. Each of our panel members will give a 5-minute talk, and there will be time for questions at the end. But please feel free to post any questions throughout the event in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. But we'll pick up the questions with the most likes. So if there are any particular burning questions, please like them. So without further ado, I would like to invite our very first panel member, Philam Ng, who is a writer and legal specialist and a PhD student. He contributes regularly to platforms such as Resonate and BEC.N, and his articles draw from his background in law, specifically immigration and human rights. And Philam will share with us some of the facts and figures of racism and discrimination against East and Southeast Asia people in the UK. Over to you, Philam.
Hi everyone, so my presentation looks to add some context to the discussion of racism towards the East and Southeast Asian community in the UK by looking at some data. Now I'll be using the term EC throughout this presentation, which is an abbreviation of East and Southeast Asian. So let's start by asking how many of us are there in the UK. So this slide is based off the 2011 census data. Just note the 2021 census data we just did this year is not available till next year. So as you can see, the UK will capture ethnic data in 5 categories, where obviously EC isn't one of them. So instead, you can see that 7.5% of the UK is classed as Asian, and within that 7.5%, 9% are Chinese, and 20% could presumably be other EC groups. So that's approximately less than 2% of the UK population. In terms of where we are in the UK, we can see high population centres of Chinese people, particularly in the north, but in terms of other EC groups, we don't really know, because Asian other has been used as this kind of catch-all term, which kind of dismisses the diversity of all the different people groups under the EC banner, which is why it's important to have local organisations such as Kanong Gang who can step in where the government won't and help collect information on individual groups. Next slide, please. So in a book by Gregor, where he looked at the Chinese in Britain, he concluded that in spite of their entry into mainstream society and economy, British-born Chinese are still commonly viewed by white British as outsiders, migrants, members of a diaspora who only occupy space in British society. And this is likely a shared experience amongst the EC community, given the omission from national data as well. So it's like we're transient, like we're not viewed as permanent citizens here. But why is it that we're considered outsiders when the EC story is so intertwined with the British imperialist story? So history shows we've been in the UK since the 17th century, and through British colonisation, we see these dynamics of power and race reflected here in British society as racism towards the EC community. So everything from secret deportations of Chinese sailors to detentions of British Japanese, to Windrush, to unfair resettlement practices and restrictive and discriminatory visa policies. This historical data is evidence of how the EC community are entrenched in the making of the British story, and therefore we have a place here as much as anyone else. Next slide, please. But despite all this, it was claimed earlier this year that the UK is no longer rigged against ethnic minority groups in the Sewell report. In the Sewell report, the EC experience is not only being dismissed, it's being bastardized. So our experiences in the Sewell report specifically herald the EC community, mostly the Chinese, because that's the only data that's captured as this model minority. The minority group that, despite all odds, facing a racist past, we succeeded. This modern minority trope is problematic for many reasons, but as Madeline Sue, an Asian American scholar, said, the modern minority stereotype masks the sacrifices and downward mobility that many immigrants have had to make in order to succeed. And secondly, it perpetuates this manufactured mythos that there are good and bad ethnic minority groups. Specifically, this modern minority myth is a prominent feature in anti-Black racism, wherein the EC group is unwillingly used as a benchmark for racists to measure other people against. So the Sewell report claims a lot and uses our community as evidence of an absence of structural racism in the UK, but what's the actual reality? Next slide, please. So in education, the EC group is stereotyped as this high achieving group who enter into higher education at much higher rates than other minority groups. But the reality is that while we may enter into higher education at higher rates, there's a large attainment gap between Chinese students and white students, with the latter are more likely to attain a top degree. So what happens in the university years where EC students are not obtaining top degrees despite having good grades in the past? Could it be, as other studies have shown, that these positive stereotypes conceal the struggles of EC students, and because of this, we're overlooked for extra support? Or when we're stereotyped as high achieving students despite facing direct racism in schools, such as found with NSPCC studies, is there a will to tackle racism if students are perceived to be achieving despite this? Next slide, please. Unemployment, the EC group are claimed to be one of the highest wage earners in the UK, and therefore there's evidence of absence of racism in the workplace. The Sewell report itself, but it's hidden in the metadata, reveals that their own analysis fails to consider things like those who are self-employed. So the whole catering industry is written off, and other determinant factors like age. And when you adjust all these things to reality, young EC people specifically are the third highest unemployed group, despite being the smallest ethnic group. When you look at other markers of financial success, EC groups lag behind all other ethnic groups when it comes to household wealth and home ownership. So the question stands, is this an absence of racism or is it an absence of fair consideration? Next slide, please. On policing and crime, the Sewell report claims that EC groups have low engagement with the police and justice system, furthering this image that we're all law-abiding citizens and don't get in trouble with the police. There's also an implication that any mistrust between the police and the EC community is there because we don't reach out. But what's the data actually show? It's common knowledge that racist incidents happens in takeaways and restaurants all around the UK, and the police are aware of this, but there's been a history of apathy from the police and the EC community, and this has been linked to deaths of EC people like Miga Huang Chen and Simon San. There's also a long history of the police arresting EC victims before they even investigate the crimes, such as with Miga Huang Chen when they arrested his girlfriends for defending him. There's also been a history of police using racist language, such as with the Morecambe Bay cockle pickers. And so again, is this evidence that we're not traditionally engaged with the justice system? It can't be evidence that we don't face racism in the justice system. Next slide. I'll finish up on this one. So the Sewell report claims that ethnic minority groups do not have worse health outcomes than white people. For the EC community, again, that may be true, but the Sewell report doesn't capture how health outcomes are directly linked with social economic outcomes. So this is a nice place to tidy up on. How can you possibly measure health outcomes if data is even captured on social economic outcomes? So the point here is that we're all here to address this rise of anti-Asian racism over the last year, and we know this isn't a new thing. Anti-Asian racism is as old as British history itself, and it can be said that racism towards the EC community has been long been dismissed. But going forward, it's not just addressing racism itself. We need to address the structural issues that allow racism to fester and grow. So having data out in the public space that properly reflects our lived experience is just one step in a fight against racism. Thank you. Back to you, Becky.
Thank you very much, William. Very, very interesting statistics, and we certainly need to do something about this. So I now would like to invite our second panel member, who is Amy Phong. She's a designer, writer, and co-founder of Britain's East and Southeast Asian Network, which is a non-profit grassroots organization founded by 6 East and Southeast Asian women, whose mission is to promote positive representation of EC people in the UK and tackle discrimination at all levels. Amy will share with us some insights on EC representation in media during the pandemic. And over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation. If you could go to the first slide, please. Last year, when the first reports of COVID-19 emerged, major news media outlets reported it as a China or Chinese virus, with several images of EC faces used in these articles without it having any relevancy to East or Southeast Asian people specifically. For example, one image shows two people of apparent EC descent in an article about the rise of COVID-19 in Sheffield, but the population of EC people there is less than 1% according to the latest census data. In isolation, the image choice could be viewed as an unfortunate coincidence. But when placed together, as you can see here, we can begin to understand that the selection of EC people for COVID-19 reporting is definitely influenced by conscious or unconscious biases by these news outlets. If you could go to the next slide, please. Previous to the pandemic, EC people in media were next to invisible, and as someone who grew up in the UK, more representation is constantly what we are striving and hope for, but not just in news images, in education and in leadership and government roles too. In the 2020 Colour of Power report, it was discovered that only 0.27% of the most powerful positions in the UK are made up of EC people. However, when the pandemic struck, the resulting hypervisibility we experience in this kind of reporting is active in increasing xenophobia, which affects not only Chinese people, but people racialized as Chinese. Racist hate crime and incidents have increased threefold compared to the first quarter of 2019 and 2020 when the pandemic struck. Essentially, this is not the representation we asked for, and it's a symptom of the consistent scapegoating of minoritized communities when it comes to times of economic upheaval. Attention is turned away from government failures to control the pandemic effectively and towards those who are struggling day to day to survive, the same as anyone else. In the next slide, I want to issue a trigger warning, as I will be showing two news stories referring to cases of Mi Quen Chong and Benelin Burke and her daughter Jellica. They'll contain descriptions of a sensitive and upsetting nature. So if you want to prepare or take a moment at this point, please feel free to do so. So now you can move on to the next slide. Now I want to touch on these important yet hugely underreported crimes that happened to two Southeast Asian women who went missing and were subsequently discovered to be violently murdered. We have to question why there was not as much coverage for these two people and why there's such an empathy gap of what is considered newsworthy. All people who have gone missing deserve equal attention, and we must apply pressure on these news outlets to address unbalanced reporting. So if you could move on to the next slide. In response to the problematic image choices used by news outlets in their COVID-19 reporting, one of our co-founders, Viv Yao, created a petition last year to demand they stop doing so. The petition currently has over 30,000 signatures and was used as a vehicle for the first ever anti-EC racism parliamentary debate led by Labour MP Sarah Owen in October 2020. The more people who speak up and complain, the more likely we can disrupt the harmful narrative that is played around our identity as EC people. We also created a website, bc.co.uk, in order to provide a platform to bring awareness on the various issues and nuances around the UK EC experience. We need to take charge of our own narrative, and we hope that encourages more inter-community understanding and lead to increased connection between social justice organisations and spur on further collective organising in the future. Media representation is simply one small part of the picture. And on to my final slide. We are also launching UK's first EC Heritage Month in September. It's dedicated to East and Southeast Asian history and heritage. There'll be a programme of events spanning talks, panels, exhibitions, social gatherings and celebrations that will hopefully inspire more education around our community. So please sign our petition to have the event recognised as a national observance by the Government Department of Culture, Media and Sport. All the details on our website. I'll be ending the presentation here, but thanks so much for your time, and the BeSeen inbox is always open for discussion on any subject you wish to see on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amy. I certainly remember seeing some of these media coverage, and it's great to have platforms like ECA.N to support the East and Southeast Asian community and raise the awareness as well. So our third panelist is Francesca Humi. She's Advocacy and Campaigns Officer at Kalangan Filipino Consortium, which supports undocumented Filipino migrants in London becoming regularized, access to free legal advice, and gain a better understanding of their rights. And Francesca will share with us some experience of Filipino and EC migrants under the hostile environment policy. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you, Betty. Yes, so hi, I'm Francesca. I'm the Advocacy and Campaigns Officer at Kanlungan. I'll start by giving you all an overview of what Kanlungan does. So next slide, please. So we were founded in 1994, and Kanlungan actually means shelter or safe haven in Tagalog, and that is the kind of motivating mission behind all of the work that we do. So we do co-learning workshops and skills training, advice on employment, welfare and immigration. We provide cultural and spiritual activities, mental health and well-being support in community languages, and we campaign for migrants' rights, including lobbying local and national government. Next slide, please. We have 12 member organizations and counting, including the Filipino Domestic Workers Association, the Southeast and East Asia Center, and Filipino student organizations. So we really try reaching the Filipino migrant community across the UK as much as possible. Next slide, please. So what are the experiences of the Filipino community in the UK? And for this presentation, I'm focusing more on the experiences of first generation migrants, so people who are here on visas and do not have indefinite leave to remain or do not have British citizenship yet, which is the majority of the Filipino community in the UK. There's about 400,000 Filipinos living in the UK, but as Vilam explained in his presentation, this is a vast underestimation because of issues with the census data, and Filipinos might not, fill in the right census category or might not label themselves as Asian, and plus we are looped in, we are kind of under this umbrella category of Asian other, which means that there is very little distinction between all of the different East and Southeast Asian groups that exist in that umbrella category. We are part of a newer migrant community, so there have been Filipino migrants to the UK as early as the 1960s, mainly working in the health and social care systems, but overwhelmingly these newer movements of migration from the Philippines to the UK are from really in earnest from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And as I was saying, this invisibility of our community stems from the problem with the census reporting, but also because a lot of the work that Filipinos do in this country is racialized and gendered. So it is work that is considered to be highly feminized, so like care work, nursing, domestic work, childcare, which in general doesn't motivate a lot of solidarity from the general population in a country. During COVID-19, we have experienced a really disproportionate impact of the pandemic across our community. So again, as Vilam was saying, we are overrepresented in the NHS with the third largest nationality working in the NHS after British and Indian citizens. But really in terms of percentage, that's only about 3% of nursing staff. But in May of 2020, Filipinos made up 1 in 4 COVID-19 deaths amongst NHS staff. And this was due to shortages in PPE and Filipino staff being systematically given PPE last, being systematically allocated to the most dangerous tasks like triage or COVID wards, even if they had only just arrived in the UK. So back in 2020, I remember speaking to nurses who told me that they had just arrived in England, didn't even know where to go grocery shopping, but they were already being forced to the front line because their managers were saying, well, you're Filipino, so you're going to be very good at this and, you'll be fine. So it's, again, this idea of model minority myth, and it's like positive discrimination that is actually used against you and is actually used to kill you in a way. Next slide, please. So these are some of the news stories that we've worked on and give you an idea of the type of the different experiences of the Filipino community during the pandemic, and you can find all these articles that we worked on the Kanlungan website. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk to you a bit more about the hostile environment policy, because this is the main series of laws that shape the experiences of Filipino migrants in the UK and all migrants in the UK. So the hostile environment policy started in 2012, and it creates a punitive climate for migrants. So for example, there's the no recourse to public funds condition that's attached to immigration status, which means that people cannot get support from the council. Let's say, if, like, for example, if they're a survivor of domestic violence, they will not be eligible to go to a refuge. They have to pay an NHS surcharge, even if they're working at the NHS, and they will have to pay very high Home Office fees. This also means the hostile environment policy also makes people dependent on their work visa and on their specific contract that they have. So this is another reason why there was such a disproportionate impact amongst Filipino healthcare workers. It was because there's a fear of losing their job and therefore losing their visa if there was any kind of pushback against their employer if they complained. And one example of how precarious your work and immigration situation can be is with the domestic workers visa. So this basically makes the kafala system legal in the UK, and a domestic worker can be brought in by their employer for 6 months at a time. If they leave their employer because their employer is abusive, then they become undocumented. So essentially they're being punished for asserting their rights in the UK. Next slide, please. And I know I need to wrap up really quickly. So again, these are some of the stories that we've worked on, and you can find them on our website. Finally, next slide, please. We are a founding member of the Status Now for All network. We are a network and coalition of organizations, groups and individuals campaigning for the immediate regularization of all undocumented migrants, to ensure universal healthcare for all, and to end the hostile environment policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I mean, it's concerning hearing all these, the Filipino NHS nursing staff death rate and that the kind of hostile environment policy. And I'm really pleased to hear the great work Kalanga is doing to support the community. Our final panelist is Dr. Yo-Yo Dixon. She's a senior laboratory manager in the Department of Surgery and Cancer at Imperial. Yo-Yo will tell us about her personal experiences in the UK as someone from East and Southeast Asia. And over to you, Yo-Yo.
Hello. Hiya. My name is Yo-Yo Tenyu Dixon, and Tenyu is my Chinese name, so I am Chinese. So next slide, please. And click, please. Right. I was born in British colony, Hong Kong. I grew up to see the handover of Hong Kong to China, but not long after the handover, I came to the UK for further education. Next slide, please. Came over. I went all the way to Scotland, and I came over in the summer, end of summer in Hong Kong. So I was in t-shirt, but when I arrived in Scotland, I had a temperature shock. It was so cold, and literally to me, it's winter already. And Scotland was quite different compared to Hong Kong, but I really enjoyed the atmosphere because there's lots of space, lots of green. Because I came over myself, my parents were in Hong Kong, so I had to start looking after myself. So I had to start cooking for myself. Obviously, I used to having Chinese food, and so in Scotland, luckily there's a small Chinatown, so we could still buy Chinese products and then cook our own Chinese food at home. I went to college, and before I went to Scotland, I just walked to school. But in Scotland, in Glasgow, I had to walk to the train station and then get on the train to get to the college. That was quite different as well, and find that actually train ticket was quite expensive in Scotland, and in the UK as a whole anyway. Then after a year in Scotland, roughly, I moved down to London to do my Bachelor of Science degree. I spent 4 years to finish my degree. That's because I spent 1 year doing industrial placement in Belgium. So if you click again, you will see that. So I spent about 10 months in Belgium working in Janssen Pharmaceutical, which you probably are quite familiar with the name, because that is one of the manufacturers for one of the COVID vaccine that is being used worldwide. Then after that, I went to do a PhD, but my decision to do a PhD was actually quite late compared to my peers at the time. I just didn't know what to do. All I know is I didn't want to go back to Hong Kong. So I was lucky enough to get a PhD studentship at Queen Mary University of London and did my PhD there. Next slide, please. Then I spent 3 years to do my PhD, and during my writing up, because the studentship funding has stopped, I really need to start working to earn some income to provide myself to live, etc. So I found a job that is a contract-based job with an agent called SLG, working at Pfizer all over in Sandwich in Kent. Now, that was my first taxable job, but it's also the job that I hate the most or dislike the most. I didn't have a very nice experience in being a contracted scientist at Pfizer. First of all, if you're not directly employed by Pfizer, you are treated as a second-class citizen. They look at you with like special glasses, like you're an alien, etc. Secondly, another thing that I wasn't too happy there is within Pfizer, they have an intranet where people could post second-hand items for sale. And then my partner, which is my husband nowadays, he obviously has moved around within the UK as well. He's white British, by the way. He has a special musical CDs, all genuine, and he's fed up of carrying them around whenever we have to move. So then he said that, oh, maybe we should just sell it, which I did. So I put it onto the website to sell the CD, and we are not trying to make any profit. So we set it for £1 each. Then I got myself into trouble from no, I didn't really know why I got myself into trouble, but we eventually find out that apparently somebody reported me selling non-authentic CDs at Pfizer. And then there was some investigation with the line manager and talk and they, etc. And we have to produce the CD. So they at the end it got all resolved because they are genuine CD. We were just trying to get rid of this, so that's why we're selling it for £1. And but some people seem to have assumed, oh, this girl is Chinese, she must be selling something, you know, like pirated CDs, etc. So then I finished the contract, moved on to Imperial, and joined as a postdoctoral researcher. Next slide, please. And so during my time at Imperial, I was a postdoc initially. Then I became a laboratory manager. And then later on, I became a senior laboratory manager. And during my time in Imperial, I have several milestones personally as well. I got married. I spent enough time under the legal visit in the UK that I become a British citizen. I had to do the test, the citizenship test. I did not have to do English test because I study here. And then had to go to the local register to do to conduct the ceremony. Then I also had the baby, etc. Next slide, please. And as an employer, Imperial, they offer a lot of opportunities. I complete various health and safety training courses, leadership management development program, and the impact program that I complete in 2019. If you look very closely, you should be able to spot me. And it was interesting to be in the impact program because you find I got to meet people that actually in a similar boat as me. And there's also various forum and network within Imperial that is very beneficial for staff or students. So such as Imperial as one, that bringing everybody together, or whether they come from China, Hong Kong, Europe, Africa, etc. And they host various activities such as Chinese New Year activities a few months ago, and that was very entertaining. And they did not mind having my young daughter to attend as well. So yeah, and personally, what I would say that having been here half of my life in the UK, I enjoy it very much, although there have been some challenging moments, but together with friends, peers, you can get through it. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Yo-Yo, for sharing your lived experience. And it's lovely seeing that picture of the Impact program graduates in that cohort. And I just want to ditto also, I mean, that Impact program is a fantastic program, which Imperial, the EDIC Center, organized to support all the BAME staff at Imperial. And it's really, really lovely to see that. So I would now like to invite all our 4 speakers to come on the panel for the Q&A. I'm going to start off with a question for each of your panel member, and then I will then open up the panel to address questions from the audiences. So my first question is for Amy. How do you think the pandemic has affected the perception of East and Southeast Asia people?
I think that because of our lack of voice and presence in media, the idea that we're a model minority, that we don't speak up, and that we are unhygienic continues to dehumanize us. I remember there were talk of wet markets, for example, that pushed this narrative that we're somehow savage or animalistic. And this has had a really direct impact on EC food businesses, which have seen violent racism and vandalism towards them. There was an incident in Somerset, I believe, where there was a Chinese takeaway where people threw fireworks into their window and damaged their shop front. And of course, that is a financial burden for them, which is further exacerbated, you know, by the fact that there was a lockdown and people were less likely to go out and, you know, go to their business. So it has a really big impact. Also, people racialized as Chinese were also abused, such as the Filipino nurse who was on his way home from work from treating COVID patients and was then, you know, called out with racial slurs that from people who thought he was Chinese. So again, the mental health and well-being impact on these people has been hugely damaging to many people. There was also the suggestion that Chinese students are subject to extra surveillance or will have more limited routes to study in the UK because they're suspected as being spies. And this reinforces the idea that EC people are not to be trusted and exacerbates this yellow peril. I want to do inverted marks on this yellow peril narrative that Eastern powers are looking to invade or take over. So I think this pandemic has had an unquestionably negative impact on EC communities, and we're also not seen as worthy of protections. For example, community centres such as the Hackney Chinese Community Centre, London Chinese Community Centre, the Vietnamese Mental Health Wellbeing Centre has had their funding cut. And so the community centres that are there to support are not being able to do their jobs. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Amy. Very interesting. So my second question is addressed to William. How do we maintain sustainable advocacy and support the movement?
So in terms of sustainable, I'm going to try and be as personal as possible, because in terms of seeing and getting involved in anti-racism as a broad kind of movement, like, I'm not a natural advocate at all. I'm actually quite lazy. So when I see all the social injustices around me, like, I feel that anger in my chest, but usually, like, I've usually in the past just resigned to feeling angry. But it's seeing other groups, especially in the last 2 years, have this huge boom in social activism groups specifically towards anti-racism in the EC community, like BScene, kind of COG, EVR, and then noticing and having this spotlight on organizations that have been active in the UK for a long time, such as Kowloon Gang. It's difficult to not see the electricity these organizations bring and still sit back. And I'm very conscientious about pressuring people to get involved in activism and turning that anger into, you know, activist things. But because I know there's a lot of social pressure in that, but we're living in this age of social media now. And if you're like me and you felt that anger in your chest and you just wanted to find a place to find solidarity, then reach out to these different groups. You'll find in these groups that advocacy is sustained organically because they reach out to other groups. They find relationships with other marginalized groups, such as reaching out to Afro-Caribbean groups, Muslim groups and stuff. I know like Be Seen has done a Be Seen COG. I'm doing something later on with Be Seen, active bystander training with protection approaches. There's solidarity within the anti-racism space itself. So if you're like me, just challenge the apathy inside yourself and look outward, and you'll see, you'll be energized when you see the energy other people bring.
Thank you, Vivian. It's amazing how powerful social media is nowadays. Can use the social media to reach out to all these groups that you mentioned there. So my next question goes to Francesca. What are the ways you have found a sense of belonging and community here in the UK?
Thank you. Well, definitely through the work that I do at Gandungan, and before I was working at Gandungan, I was volunteering with Gandungan, or I was attending events that they were organising, or events that when I was at uni, that the Filipino student societies were organising, and I was feeling really separated from my Filipino culture and from my community, because I had been living and working in Manila for 2 years before moving to London. So I went from like being completely immersed in my culture and my people to feeling quite alienated. But then once I found the right groups, I was able to find that sense of belonging. And even beyond the Filipino community, there are groups like Be Seen Now, or like DICON, for example, which is a zine for East and Southeast Asians, that are really trying to create space for East and Southeast Asian people to express their creativity, their feelings, their thoughts. So it's been really nice to discover like a network of different organizations that work with East and Southeast Asian people, like Vilam has said. So I think, I find a tremendous sense of belonging and community through work and through the work that I do, because I work directly with undocumented Filipino migrants and with just people from lots of different walks of life, but we all come together, and it's in this idea of co-learning and helping each other collaboratively, and not in this top-down or kind of hierarchical dynamic. So that's been really empowering.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I mean, we certainly need more network like Kalanga to help and support the UC community. And again, just want to reiterate, it's great work that doing through Kalanga. My last question goes to Yo-Yo. I want to know from Yo-Yo, what positive changes have you seen in the past 5 to 10 years when it comes to the experiences of East and Southeast Asia people in the UK?
First of all, it's the grocery. 5 to 10 years ago, I think if you want to buy a particular Asian product, whether it's Chinese or Vietnamese, I think you can only purchase them in a Chinese super or Oriental supermarket or shop. But nowadays, actually, they are spreading. You can actually buy them from Western supermarket, which you can see in the supermarket. You can buy all sorts of Indian spices, African seasoning, etc. So it is about time for them to actually also sell more Oriental products and Asian products. Other changes is it seems to because culture, like some of the festival, like the Indian festival, because I think historically they have been here a bit longer. They have the generation is they have a second or third generation here. Their festival are celebrated generally anyway. And what I have seen is they nowadays they celebrate the Chinese or Asian festival as well, quite a lot, and children actually know about it. not like my children, but other children, like Western children, my daughter classmate, etc. They're actually aware of other festivals as well, and they do spend a good amount of time talking about Chinese New Year, do a lot of activity, etc. So I think these are very positive changes in the UK. That's my answer.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. I mean, from my personal experience, I see some of the positive changes. It's like, for example, in higher education, university, we have networks like Imperial S1, raising the awareness of diversity, bring all the different communities together. These are fantastic things to see. But my personal feeling that I think every single organization, university can do more about this as well. So I would now like to open up the panel to answer some of the questions from the audience, and I'm trying to see which of the question has most like. Okay. I see there's a question that has got 9 likes there. I'm going to open this question up to the audience. This question, it says, could you give some advice on when we face racism and Asian hate from other people, mostly related to COVID-19? How should we react? That's the first part of the question. And then this audience said, he said, I have experienced these issues several times last year. Normally, I would just avoid confrontation, afraid of being physically attacked, but I hope there is a better solution when dealing with such a situation. Any advice we can give from the panel?
I'd advise that person to prioritize their own safety. It really depends on the situation, obviously, if it's a verbal attack or if it's a physical attack, whether you're in a public space. Are there people around who can help you? Are there shops that you can go into? Are you able to remove yourself from that situation? Essentially, I think many East and Southeast Asian people feel the burden of having to speak out, of reacting directly, because they feel like often we don't do that, and therefore by not doing so, you're perpetuating this idea. But I really think that we have to stop doing that. And if you need to remove yourself, if you need to do what's right for you to keep yourself safe, then you have to do that. And there are other ways of dealing with it. For example, you could talk about it. You could go to really amazing organizations like the one that Francesca mentioned, like SAAC, the Southeast and East Asian Center, who can act as a conduit between you and the police if you wish to report it. Make sure you keep your wits about you. Make sure that you gather any information you need, such as time, place, information from witnesses, if you do wish to report it. Of course, if you don't want to, that's absolutely fine. Many people don't want to involve the police. But at the same time, if you feel safe, and say if you're in a group of people and it's just a verbal situation, maybe someone's being ignorant but not necessarily violent, you could practice calling them in, questioning them on why they're saying those things, why they might be using, say, slurs or problematic language, if you feel safe to. But I really do think safety is the #1 priority for you.
Phelan, yeah, please.
I can't stress enough, everything Amy said is completely correct. I struggle with this question a lot as well, because even talking with my own friends and seeing the kind of rise in anti-Asian racism in the last year, it's very easy to defer back to that kind of default state of, oh, I'll just get involved and fight. That's not realistic. Struggling with this question itself, it helps to have things like active bystander training, which I mentioned before, like later today, like protection approaches and BCM are hosting active bystander training, just so you get an idea of, in these really like specific social situations where you think you know how to act, right? But then when you're in that situation, your body kind of freezes. Even thinking about it, sometimes I freeze, thinking how would I actually react in that situation. Being prepared in having active bystander training and things like that can really help.
Thank you, Phelan. I agree with you that active bystanders training, I think, is really important. And I certainly know at Imperial we do have that training, and some of the faculties are also offering that training to students as well. And so, okay, thank you very much for answering the question. I can see there's another question with 8 likes here. It says, many of you mentioned the issue of the umbrella Asian and Asian other category. What is your opinion about the popular BAME label is it representative enough for E/SEA issues, especially when recently used more for the Black Lives Matter movement? Would like any of the panel like to address this?
I can go first.
Please do, Francesca.
Yeah, I personally do not love the BAME label. It is a label that, if I'm not mistaken, and please do correct me if the panelists know, but I believe it's a label that was created by the government. So it's more of a top-down way of labeling us. It is an extremely homogenizing label because it's literally Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. Minority ethnic includes, like, for example, like Polish people or other ethnic minorities in the UK. So when people are talking about, oh, we need to be inclusive of BAME people, you're trying to include a lot of people that experience violence, discrimination, xenophobia, or racism in very different ways and are affected by very different things. So, for example, you might be lumping in people who are like third generation migrants or British, so are not dealing with the hostile environment policy, but might be dealing with really serious police brutality, like through stop and search, for example, in the UK, especially if they're Afro-Caribbean or African. But you're then also lumping in people who are dealing with the hostile environment policy and don't have citizenship. So questions around like voting rights or participation in civil society or that kind of thing aren't even applicable because, you know, if you don't even have citizenship, then what does it matter whether or not you need voting ID, you know, in order to vote, because you're not eligible anyway. So you're lumping in groups that have very specific needs, and those specific needs need to be like funded in specific ways and addressed through specific structural and systemic changes. And it's, for me, I do not find it helpful, and it encourages, again, this invisibilization of our specific experiences as a Filipino community and as the East and Southeast Asian community, because again, a lot of the discourse last year was around the disproportionate impact of COVID on BAME nurses. It's like, well, actually, if you look at the data, it's not BAME in general, it's really specific to the Filipino community and also Black staff. So obviously there is strength in having solidarity across people who are racialized and people who are being exploited and pushed into destitution by the same systems, but there is a need to be specific and to name specific issues when they are occurring.
Thank you, Francesca. I see there's another question kind of related as well. It says, how can we move to a pan-Asian understanding of being Asian so that we are not in silos of East and Southeast Asian, but also Southeast Asian, Eurasian, Turkish, etc.? To what extent are these identities of Asian and Southeast Asian due to imperialist imaginaries such as Oriental and others? Would any of the panel would like to answer that?
I can go, maybe. I'm just trying to formulate my thoughts.
Yeah.
I keep thinking back to Edward Said's book, Orientalism. It's difficult because, exactly as Francesca said, it is very related to the BAME terminology as well. As like there is need for being specific in terms of different struggles and different ethnic minority groups that fail. Like I am a British-born Chinese person. I will never know what it's like to take a citizenship test to be British. So there is, I think, energy to be. I guess silo is the. I wouldn't agree with the terminology silo. I understand why it's been used in the question. Like, I would say, in terms of categorization, by all means, people need to categorize and collect data. I understand that's why BAME as a term as well has existed. But as exactly as Francesca says, it's a top-down thing. It's a top-down thing, and it can also be used as a scapegoat, as a reason, oh, we've done this for BAME, but what does that actually mean at the bottom level? Like, yes, you maybe hired one ethnic minority person in a high position and stuff, but how about the rest of the ethnic minorities? And how about the person that's on a visa that's struggling, that can't change jobs as easily, even though they may be well qualified for the job itself? I do think it's a very delicate situation in the sense of what terminology do we use. But for example, when it comes to Eurasian issues, actually, in terms of the census data, for example, in 2021, they added Roma Gypsy as one of the ethnic categories in the census data, and that was the first time that's ever been added. And that's a good sign, as in, like, because they have very specific struggles and issues that I would never deal with. So it would be good in that sense to collect that data, analyze it, and see what kind of social resources we can put into that to address the issues. Oh, I'm sorry if that's not a very cohesive answer, but that's the best I can give. It's a very strong question.
Thank you, Willem. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, Willem, in that it's really complicated. And I think it's because ideas of race and ethnicity and those categories, they're all constructs. And the term EC can be used as a rallying banner, as we have now, to bring people together with overlapping causes, but it's actually imperfect. It doesn't serve every single purpose, because every identity and people's journeys are very nuanced. And you've mentioned words like Eurasian, people prefer mixed ethnicity, other people prefer mixed race, and it's all very personal to the individual. So it's a hard one to answer, and I think what we need is a very UK specific EC discourse to talk about these things and to give the people from those various identities platforms to speak on that and to explore that further. But I always keep that in the back of my mind, that whenever I even say stuff like British born Chinese, it flattens an experience, because for myself, I say British born Chinese, but my family are from Vietnam, are also Vietnamese. And so that already, again, saying that will give people an idea that doesn't actually reflect the truth completely. And that's so individual to absolutely everyone. Not every BBC experience is the same as the other person. The same for someone who's mixed ethnicity won't have the same one for someone else. So we need more exploration on these ideas.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I agree with you as well. I mean, at the moment, as long as we know what each of these terms stands for, so that we know what it represents. But I also agree with you that we need more exploration from the UK as to what really is the term that we should be using. So thank you, Amy and Willem, for answering the question. There is another question which has 5 likes. It says, the choice of COVID-related images is stunning. Is it worth raising this with a professional body of news editors?
Yeah, it's been done. Recently, there was a case of a lady reporting for the Times newspaper, and she wrote the line, and I haven't memorized it because I probably tried to erase it from my mind, but she wrote something about the late prince who died, Prince Philip, and said that he enjoyed making gaffes about slitty-eyed people. There was a massive campaign around that. They wrote to, I believe it was IPSO, and sorry, I don't know that precise acronym for the body that regulates editorial reporting, but they rejected the claims completely that it was racist. And of course, an apology, inverted commas, was issued. And so there have been efforts to be made to constantly address this and apply pressure. But unfortunately, because the people at the top do not relate to these lived experiences, are not touched by it or affected by it, they're more likely to reject any claims that they might be biased, that they might be racist, because that would shed a light on the fact that they are racist. We have to name it what it is. And because they have the fear of that label, they refuse to address it. And so, yeah, we need to use all our voices to continue to apply pressure and also to push the narrative that this is untrue, and also put more people in positions who can report on this accurately and can call in the people who they work with, because it's a massive problem. And yeah, so it has been done. People are trying, it's just not being listened to.
Thank you, Amy. That's any of the panel want to add to that?
I mean, I'd say that these complaints get made and then nothing happens. For example, when the government made the call for input from groups about for the Sewell report, Gandungan, BC, and the Virus of Racism and other organizations, we all came together and we submitted very robust evidence to the report, and we weren't even mentioned in the acknowledgements of people who provided evidence. Just one of the organizations that participated was picked up and listed, but all of the others, all of the other actual grassroots organizations that participated and painstakingly compiled this evidence were just completely ignored, and nothing was mentioned, nothing about the disproportionate impact of COVID on Filipino healthcare workers, for example, even though that is data, that is quantitative data that is literally measurable, because you can know how many people have died. It's just that people don't want to look into it. So it's the problem with, yes, okay, we're going to have to keep reporting this, but if it keeps falling onto deaf ears, then it's what is the point? If the motivation fundamentally behind government action or investigation is not actually to genuinely reform and to genuinely listen, then your participation at the end of the day is just superficial and is not going to be taken on board. And that's unfortunately what happens with all of these official mechanisms, is that they say, well, we have these mechanisms in place, write to the editor, write to the government, start a petition. It's yeah, we are, but we're also dying and you're still not actually listening to us. So, yeah, so something's got to give. That wasn't really related to anything, but yeah, those are my thoughts.
I'd also say, if you see it happening, then if you can, use your agency to directly complain as well, because the more people do it, the more likely they are to know and listen and react, hopefully. Because when we first started the petition and we first started campaigning against this, we were all very active in finding the journalists, tweeting them, complaining to them, getting people to all do it all together. And I personally have seen a reduction. It's not completely erased, but there has been a reduction of them doing that. But we need to apply consistent pressure, because otherwise it will just pop back up again, which I have seen recently. And often what people do is they will send it to me. They'll say, Amy, see this article, it's happening again. And I say, well, you complain, do something about it, because I can't do it all on my own all the time. So if everyone jumps on board and is active in doing what they can to, send an email, call them, then hopefully we'll be listened to. I'm not saying that 100% it will happen straight away, but it has to be a cumulative action, I think, as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Francesca and Amy. And also, I just wonder, how do you think East and Southeast Asians can be allies to other groups as well to actually make this raise this awareness stronger?
Yeah, I want to challenge this idea that an ally is a noun, that's something you just are. To me, allyship is a verb. It's something that you do continually and consistently. And I think the best way to do it is to do it in a sustainable way. So, practice conscious consumerism, support EC business. Like I've mentioned, they suffered greatly during this pandemic, not just from lockdowns, but also from racism. Challenge family members and work colleagues and friends if they say something that is not inclusive or is a problem, even if it's a throwaway casual remark. I find myself having to be comfortable with discomfort, and that means before I wouldn't want to say anything. I'd want to keep the harmony, but if you can find a good way to call someone in to get them to address their internal racism or their biases, that's one way that you could help the East and Southeast Asian community. And I think lots of people are afraid of getting engaged because they're afraid of getting something wrong, because we are all capable of perpetuating harm. Even myself, daily, weekly, I can trip up by maybe not using inclusive language or saying something because I've been conditioned to believe a certain thing growing up. I think we have to stop being afraid of making mistakes. And then that way we can continue learning. And there are so many resources out there. There's Kanlungan, there's EVR, there's you know, tons and tons. You can go on our website, I guess, to find out more. But there are resources there that people have created for free that you can read by the people that it affects, to learn and educate yourself and to get different points of views. And then the more that you do that, I hope that there can be more confidence in using language, in using interpersonal relationships to ensure that the people around you are disrupted in any kind of narrative that is harmful to communities. And also make sure that if you look around, if you're going to a panel workshop, or if your work is doing something, make sure that everyone invited to that panel is someone who has that lived experience. If it's an anti-racism panel, make sure there are people of colour on that panel, because so many times I have seen panels about diversity, equity and inclusion that are all white. And so please make sure that you speak up, hold businesses and organisations accountable, because they have to be, and it has to come from us.
Thank you, Amy. This actually leads to a very good question from the audience, which I also would like to ask as well. What would you like to see organisations such as Imperial do to support the Stop Asian Hate movement? Anyone from the panel?
I can go if you want. So this, I mean, if you talk about Imperial specifically in terms of the higher education sector, well, I can speak more generally first. Like companies, big corporations, they're very quick to jump on the bandwagon of any kind of social movement, and you know, have a tweet or a post saying that yeah, we support this. That's all fine, but in terms of specifically helping the AIP community, exactly as Amy says, be true to what you're saying. Like if you generally are trying to be anti-racist, what does that mean? It means being introspective as well. Like just to like what Amy was saying as well, like being introspective within our own East Asian community. I've had a lot of tough conversations with family and friends and stuff. Like how do we address the anti-black stereotype within our own East and Southeast Asian community? And it does hurt sometimes bringing up these hard truths. If you're a company or a corporation, saying that, okay, I genuinely want to address diversity and not just have it a check mark on a checklist, then have panel members engage with your staff members that are from East and Southeast Asian and other ethnic minority groups. If you're truly anti-racist, be introspective as well, not just have like a blanket statements and stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And Francesca, would you want to add on to that?
Yes, if people can hear or see me, or I don't know, but okay, great. Yeah, I think there's been a really big movement across higher education to like decolonize and diversify and all of this stuff. And I worked in inclusive education at LSE before working at Ganlungan. And I would say it's not just about, obviously these panels are great, but it's not just about having these panels, it's about actually resourcing the long-term structural work that will go into changing the landscape of the university, the learning and teaching environment for students, and having an adequately resourced with like a specific budget that has been approved by, you know, the senior management committee of the school, and having people who are paid to do this work and not just, you know, on secondment or added on, you know, last minute, or, you know, as equity or EDI as like the add-on to their job, you know, as, you know, in the committee that they do in addition to having to like try and get tenureship and get those like academic goals, and really understanding that it's not just about not just about holding panels, or it's also about changing the space and also changing the way that things are taught and adding more meaningful diversity to the curriculum, which includes conceptual diversity, so that it, you know, including post-colonial and anti-racist critical race theory elements to curriculums, and not adding them on as afterthoughts, and being comfortable with disrupting the canon in academia, because academia tends to hold on to their like core, you know, Adam Smiths and, you know, people like that, and there comes a time where, you know, the Rousseaus and Voltaires of the world have to make room for, you know, the Kimberly Crenshaws of like the 21st century. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Francesca. I mean, do you think academia, say for example, should the higher education have a network in this to support each other, to share best practices? Just amongst all the higher education institutions, should we have a kind of a cross HE network?
I mean, I work at Aston University, and I didn't realize myself there was an ethnic minority working group that works on issues like decolonizing the curriculum, exactly things like what Francesca was saying. I had no clue that actually existed in the first place. So there is a question of how do we engage ethnic minority staff in the first place and get them involved in the groups. Having a wide network of you know, anti-racism, East and South across the whole higher education system, that's great. I mean, I'm not going to say no to that, but is it going to change the culture of higher education at the top to get these have these voices even listened to in the first place? That's already a problem on the you know, staff level on individual universities. How do we make that? I don't see, unless we change the culture of how higher education deals with anti-racism in the first place, I don't see how that's going to be workable at the national level.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and again, like I said, it's resourcing it adequately, because it can't just be people always in their volunteer and spare time taking on these extra roles, and also looking within the university at what are the grievance mechanisms in place to support students who've experienced racism and bullying and harassment, because oftentimes it's completely on the victim or survivor to bring forward all of this evidence and to, you know, to waive their anonymity and to come out and maybe even speak up against a professor who has tenure and is a, you know, big heavyweight in their department. So that's not really enabling a culture and an environment in which people can speak up and can push back. So I think that support has to go through that kind of structural change as well.
Yeah, I agree as well. So I see there's a question actually for you here from the audience for you, William. And the question says, you mentioned the theme of trust in the police. What do you think should be done to improve the police and EC Asian relationship so that EC people feel they can come to police when they experience hate?
I love this question. I saw that in the chat and I really wanted to answer it. My dad was a policeman. My dad keeps telling me he was the first Chinese policeman in Birmingham, which I don't really believe, but could be true. I don't know. It's about the culture of the police. It's the same with any kind of, I would say, I'm going to say government branch. I know that's not the right terminology, but I'm trying to be very specific in the sense that any kind of boys club culture where they have they're insulated in itself, the first thing I would say is to regain trust in the community. And it's not just the East Asian community, the Afro-Caribbean community has been dealing with this for a long, long time. Where should the responsibility lie? I went through a whole history of why the EC community distrusts the police in the first place, and the things that I found in terms of why the police arrest there's literally a concurrent theme of police arresting the victim before the assailants. There has been a history of police using racist language. I used to be in the Territorial Army, and I would hold my hands up and say I did not address or kind of combat any sort of the microaggressions I heard when people would just say racial slurs out and it was just completely normal for them. How do you address and from EC eyes, when you see that kind of attitude, it's no wonder that you kind of distrust even entering into that kind of space in the first place. So where's the responsibility lie? Where the minorities in that sense? Can the police first address the history they've had with us? I know they've tried, but things like they've disbanded the Chinatown unit in London, and that's indicative of not pooling resources anymore. Hiring more East and Southeast Asian police officers is one thing to do, but my slide before showed there's only like 0.2% police officers that are East and Southeast Asian. I know, like in the Birmingham Chinese Community Centre, they've tried to engage with the police, and we've had seminars to try and encourage East and Southeast Asian community members to report to the police, even if it's just a microaggression, even if they think it's a small thing and not worthy of being reported. But that's one police officer working in the community. Where's the will? We need to be able to see the will from the police first and have them address the kind of history before even a relationship or foundation of trust can be built.
Go on, Francesca. Thank you, Kieran.
Yeah, thank you. I would also add that there are limits, because there are things that are legally that the police are legally required to do, because it is in the law, that fundamentally make migrants, and so including East and Southeast Asian migrants, unsafe. So, for example, if you are undocumented and you go to the police, they have a duty to report you to the Home Office. And that includes if, let's say, you are a woman who is a survivor of domestic violence, and you are you are trying to report your partner for the abuse, and you call the police. I know of instances of people where the police have come in, and instead of arresting the abuser, they've arrested the woman because she is undocumented, and then they have sent her to Yarlswood Detention Centre. So there are things that fundamentally the community is just never going to trust them, because if it's either a matter of reporting your abuser or being sent to a detention center, then being deported, then you're probably not going to report your abuser. And that's something that one individual police officer can't change. This is because of the actual laws that are in place that require undocumented migrants to be reported to the Home Office.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I think we've covered most of the questions from the audience now. Let me see. There's one more question that just came through. It says, can trade unions be useful for support in acting to improve workplaces? What can trade unions do? I guess.
Oh, trade unions.
Yeah, trade unions, yes, to support this.
I think trade unions need to be doing proper outreach from the onset towards the communities and reaching them, especially with new hires, specifically in the context of NHS workers, making sure that as soon as Filipino migrants have arrived, that they are aware of what a trade union is, and that they can join it really easily, and that it's a very normalized thing to do. And also explaining the process that, I think most of the time you need to have been a member for at least 2 weeks if you want them to represent you, if you've got grievances or anything like that. So it's making sure that trade unions are reaching out to EC people as well, and that they make it clear what role they can have in helping negotiate that, and also addressing the racism that exists within trade unions, because they tend to be quite white dominated, and ensuring that their own mechanisms are up to scratch.
Thank you, Francesca. I think we've come to almost the end of this event, and I think that we covered most of the questions from the audience. And I want to, before ending it, I want to thank all our panels here today: William, Francesca, Amy, and Yo-Yo. I also want to thank Sheena and Cynthia. Special thanks to Sheena and Cynthia for organizing this event from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Center. I also want to thank Sam to supporting the technical side of this event. And if you enjoy this event and you would like to attend more event like this, please do visit the this website, from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Center, that there will be more opportunities for you to attend similar events. So I would also like to thank all the audience for their questions and for joining this event today. And let's hope through this type of event, we will further raise the awareness of this issue, and hopefully something can be done, and we can all be living in a better world. So, and I would like to just thank you all again, and to all the audiences and the panel for the event. So thank you very much.